All right, number 3, and this is really getting to the heart of the issue, why people might believe that the Bible's full of contradictions is, well, they might say that the Bible has contradicting records of the same event. That here in the Bible it says one thing, and here in the Bible it says something else. And how do we fit that together? In many cases, I think what happens here is that this is just a matter of perspective. The Bible might give us one person's perspective here, and later on, or in a different book, it gives us a second or a third or a fourth perspective. It'd be like watching a movie, right? You and your friend, and your one friend has a take on what happens, and you have a take on what happens, and you're explaining the movie to someone else, and you might share different things. Doesn't mean that one of you is wrong. It just means you have different perspectives on the same event. So an example, Judas Iscariot. We're going to talk about him. Judas, one of the 12 disciples, he betrays Jesus into getting arrested. And then after that, who knows what happens to Judas? Genghis. Yeah, he dies. And there are 2 accounts of the death of Judas, and that's what we're going to look at. We see one account in Matthew. Matthew chapter 27, it says, "When Judas, who betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders. 'I have sinned,' Judas said, 'for I have betrayed innocent blood.' 'What is that to us?' the Pharisees replied. 'That's your responsibility.' So Judas threw the money into the temple and left, and he went away and hanged himself. The chief priest picked up the coins and said, 'It's against the law for us to put this into the treasury, since it's blood money.' So they used the money to buy a potter's field as a burial place for foreigners. That is why it has been called the field of blood to this day. Then what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled, that they took 30 pieces of silver, the price set on him by the people of Israel, and they used them to buy the potter's field as the Lord commanded me." So, according to the Gospel of Matthew, what we see with Judas, his story, his end, is that his end comes by hanging himself. But Acts gives us a little bit of a different perspective on the situation. In Acts 1:18-19, it says, and Luke is inserting this, they're talking about why Judas has to be replaced. So Luke's explaining what happened to him, hence the parentheses. "With the payment he received for his wickedness, Judas bought a field. There he fell headlong. His body burst open. All of his intestines spilled out. Everyone in Jerusalem heard about this, so they called that field in their language Alkadama. That is the field of blood." So here, we see that Judas has burst open like someone sitting on a bag of unopened Doritos. Just pop. It's all bursting out. So this might seem a little bit contradictory. We see strangulation, we see high impact trauma being the cause of death for Judas, but let's take into account their perspectives. Matthew. Who can tell me some fun facts about Matthew real quick? Anything you know about Matthew the disciple? Matthew, we know he was a tax collector. We know that Matthew was a Jew. We know that Matthew was one of the disciples. And it was very important for us to understand that Matthew was Jewish. And that when Matthew wrote down his gospel, Matthew was writing to a Jewish audience. So Matthew makes a point, and he says, let's see, not this one, but the next one. Notice the second half, that what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled, and then he shares this prophecy that Jeremiah wrote. For the Jewish people, that was a really big deal. This is a prophecy about their Messiah, and Matthew's explaining, hey, here's what happened, and this is a fulfillment of a prophecy about our coming Messiah, so you should really believe that Jesus is our Messiah because he's fulfilling this prophecy from so long ago. And Matthew highlights that in his gospel. Luke, on the other hand, Luke is not Jewish. Luke is a Gentile, which is just anyone who's not Jewish. And Luke also worked as a doctor. So when we look back into Luke's account, Luke talks about the cause of death, right? He's a doctor. He's diagnosing this. And he says his body burst open and all of his intestines spilled out. Just different perspectives. So is it strangulation or is it high impact force or trauma that causes the death of Judas? Well, we're not specifically told an explanation. And we talked about this last week. The Bible tells us the why. The Bible focuses on the why, but it does not always focus on the how. It doesn't tell us how we get there. That doesn't mean no explanation exists. There's plenty of explanations, 3, 4, 5, that could explain how this happened. One of the simplest would just be that Judas hung himself in a tree, and the tree was, the branch he was hanging from was hanging over the field that the Pharisees bought using Judas's money, maybe even in Judas's name. And whether a branch broke or whatever he used broke, or his body just slipped out and it crashes and it falls down. And you could get even farther with it. You can talk about bacteria in a dead body and how that creates gas, and the gas floats the body and it makes your skin more susceptible to burst open. A problem with dead bodies, very scientific, right? We know the Bible full of scientifically accurate statements. But it's just different perspectives. And it's not to say that they contradict each other. They can go hand in hand together. So I would say that many times, that not every time, but many times when the Bible seems to contradict itself, it's probably just a matter of different perspectives. And when you look at who wrote it, when you look at who the book was written to at the time of writing, it's going to make a lot more sense.